This is Matthew Kratter's Bitcoin University. Today I want to talk about Bitcoin and wealth redistribution, and this video is part of a series I've been doing on Bitcoin's HODL culture. What is Bitcoin's HODL culture and why is it so important? Well, holding Bitcoin for the long term helps to create diamond-handed, low-time preference wealthy individuals and strong families, as we've been saying, and it also helps to create the necessary preconditions for a Bitcoin circular economy to develop. If your money is hot potato money like Monero or really any other crypto, merchants and individuals will constantly dump it for a stronger currency after transacting in it. They'll store their profits and savings in a stronger currency like Bitcoin, and this precludes the formation of a circular economy for that cryptocurrency. Monero's hot potato money, I'll link to this video in the description notes below. And one reason we know that people dump their Monero for Bitcoin is we can look at the multi-year chart of Monero versus Bitcoin and see that this is not where people want to store their savings. They may transact using Monero, but they end up moving their profits back into Bitcoin, as we said. So that's the background. I wanted to respond to a comment from Grateful MJP1. Thanks for covering this topic. I guess my viewpoint of hodling versus spending is more long-term and not just focused on myself or family. Bitcoin to me is not about your wealth or my wealth or generational wealth. It's about redistributing all wealth to everyone, full stop. I think that hodl culture is a symptom of the fiat system, and if we want to replace the fiat system, maybe we need to redefine our relationship with money entirely. This idea that he has that hodl culture is a symptom of the fiat system, I think this comment betrays a really deep misunderstanding not only of Bitcoin, but also of basic economic history and how economies and capital formation function. Savings is essential for civilizational flourishing. Savings is essential for capital formation. Modern civilization really began in the Middle East when people began to accumulate an economic surplus, for example, storing more grain than they consumed. And if people don't save more than they spend, then there will never be a surplus that can be invested in projects, enterprises, farms, corporations, and other human endeavors. At a very basic level, you can think about it like this. If you eat all of the wheat from this year's harvest, there won't be any seeds to plant for next year's harvest. So you cannot have capital formation if people choose not to save. And savings itself requires people to have long-term time horizons, self-control, and hope in the future. And then learning how to save can help to develop these same virtues as well. So it really is a virtuous circle. And it's really modern fiat culture that is the complete opposite. Fiat culture, not hodling culture, it's fiat culture that teaches people to have short-term time horizons, high time preference behavior, and mindless consumerism. Because fiat money is a melting ice cube, it makes a certain amount of sense to try to spend it as quickly as possible, because if you wait too long, it won't buy as many goods and services. So it's really fiat money that's at the root of modern mindless consumerism, and both fiat money and modern mindless consumerism are 20th century inventions. Fiat money inevitably leads to empty materialistic lives and superficial cultures we see everywhere around us, shopping culture, and this is a huge problem in crypto as well, where all of the people are extremely fiat with their ideologies and behavior. A lot of short-term thinking, short-term trading, and crass materialism, as we always see with crypto and Lambos, this silly idea. We see with Richard Hart, the scammer, who got a lot of possessions by dumping his token on a bunch of idiots, and people like Charles Hoskinson, who also lead very crass, materialistic lives. Now, Bitcoin is not just about having better money. Bitcoin also marks the return of a healthier, more spiritual, and less materialistic culture. If you're enjoying this video so far, I just ask you quickly here to please help to support the channel. Click the subscribe button, leave a like, leave a comment, suggestion, topic for a future video. Also share this video with a friend or family member. So Bitcoin marks the return of a healthier, more spiritual, and less materialistic consumer culture. Bitcoin leads men and women as they go down the rabbit hole to want to become better versions of themselves. And this is something I've definitely experienced over the past few years, taking better care of your body through real food and exercise, focusing more on relationships than possessions, focusing on family formation, getting married, having children, focusing on creating a legacy for the world, and helping to upgrade the culture. This is what hope and positive thinking looks like. In a similar way to how sound money, in particular, the Florentine gold florin, was the economic foundation for much of the Italian renaissance. And what's extraordinary is that the florin did not change its gold content between 1252 and 1533. And I think it's really responsible for the civilizational flourishing that we see in Florence, the Duomo and the Baptistery here, Botticelli's Primavera, and Dante's work as well. These amazing achievements all took place during this very short period of time. And I hope that the return to sound money on a Bitcoin standard will usher in a similar Bitcoin renaissance where we can see things that we now dream of, a modern civilization and beautiful architecture. Bitcoin to me, if we return to this person's comment, Bitcoin to me is not about your wealth or my wealth or generational wealth. It's about redistributing all wealth to everyone, full stop. And I think that sounds great as long as it's a voluntary redistribution. If it's not a voluntary redistribution, then it's just more plain theft, like Russian or Chinese communism or American, European, Canadian, Australian, New Zealand socialism that we see these days. Now, fortunately, it's really, really difficult to steal someone's Bitcoin. And in fact, you can kill them and still not get their Bitcoin. By contrast, though, the modern fiat system is all about not private property, but it's all about theft and the redistribution of wealth. And governments on a fiat standard fund their deficits by picking the pockets of everyone through money printing and inflation, which is a stealth tax that ironically predominantly hurts the working and middle classes, since wealthy people are usually financially sophisticated enough to be able to hedge against it. The fiat money system is like soft socialism, which makes sense when you remember that extreme centralization of power and giving control to a central bank were key pillars of the garbage economics and politics espoused by Marx and Engels. If we take a look at these 10 points from the Communist Manifesto, abolition of private property, of course, and then number 5 here, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. He's talking about the modern central bank, unfortunately, and the modern central bank is a very communist thing in this sense. By contrast, Bitcoin is all about giving people everywhere access to the same sound, decentralized money, and a level playing field. Now, anyone can have their own Swiss bank account with a Bitcoin hardware wallet or a mobile phone app, not just the very rich, as has been true in the past. By protecting private property and defunding government corruption, Bitcoin levels the economic playing field for 8 billion people. Bitcoin doesn't necessarily ensure equal economic outcomes because people are not equally good at the same things, and certain jobs pay more money than other jobs. But Bitcoin does give people a chance for economic advancement wherever they live. And before Bitcoin, if you didn't live in a country that had a relatively less bad major currency like the US dollar, euro, yen, Australian dollar, Canadian dollar, or Swiss franc, if you didn't live in one of these privileged countries, it was virtually impossible to accumulate capital, in other words, to save money, because if you tried to save in the local fiat, it was just a melting ice cube and you could never get ahead, since any economic value stored in a weak local fiat currency constantly being destroyed by monetary devaluation. This is what we mean by the melting ice cube. By contrast, Bitcoin levels the playing field by giving every person, every family, every village, every city, every country access to their own Swiss bank account that they can then use to accumulate and preserve capital that can be used to fund corporate ventures, scientific research, arts and music and cultural flourishing, etc., as well as taking care of the young, the old, the sick, the disabled, and all of those who cannot take care of themselves, and doing so in a highly effective, decentralized, free market-driven manner rather than by corrupt bureaucratic government agencies that care more about growing their annual budgets and power than doing anything productive that actually helps real people. We've seen this in California, where from 2018 to 2022, the California government spent $17.5 billion trying to combat homelessness, whatever that means. And of course, homelessness got worse, but a lot of bureaucrats and a lot of government leeches got rich in the process. Now, I want to return to the second half of Grateful MJP1's comment. Second, the sentiment that is also pervasive with HODL culture, in my opinion, is the idea that everyone gets Bitcoin at the price they deserve. Wow, just wow. So I guess people in third world countries don't deserve Bitcoin at all. I believe, again, this mentality is a symptom of the greedy fiat system, but I think it provides a great point to dive inwards and examine our morals and ethics. Bitcoin is free to everyone, not just those who found out early and not just those who can handle volatility. Well, this is a very, very silly idea because the people who've been hodling since 2011 definitely deserve the Bitcoin, and all the trials and tribulations they've gone through in order to hold the Bitcoin to the present. And very, very few people have done that. It marks a very strong type of human being who's able to do that. I, for myself, only came into Bitcoin in 2019, so I'm not sure why this person is against people who had very strong self-control and were really smart and held this currency for a very long period of time. And this idea that you could somehow shield people from Bitcoin's volatility, I'm not sure how that would work. Maybe we'd have a government agency, which would be the agency for protecting people against Bitcoin's volatility or something like that. The other thing that he says, which I think is just not true, this idea that certain countries and people in third world countries or developing countries will not get Bitcoin. What we're seeing in many cases is actually the exact opposite. We have the current quote-unquote elite, people like Warren Bailout, Buffett, and his banker friends. They're the ones who don't like Bitcoin. Buffett here is saying that he wouldn't pay $25 for all the Bitcoin in the world. And what we see instead is we actually see a lot more Bitcoin adoption among the poor in developing countries. Here's Pedro, who lives at Bitcoin Lake in Guatemala, talking about how he's opening his third restaurant and he's been accepting Bitcoin. We have the Naira crisis in Nigeria fueling Bitcoin adoption. And then, of course, we have countries, very small countries that don't really matter on the geopolitical grand stage. They're always the ones who come to Bitcoin first. So in many ways, Bitcoin really is for the outsiders, and people in developing countries who live under very bad fiat currency regimes always understand Bitcoin much better and much sooner than Americans and Europeans. So I think his other point here is just not true. He responded to his own comments saying, after diving deeper into your videos, I found that most of my questions have already been answered. I wish you the best in life, but I won't be along on that journey with you. I think it's great how the Bitcoin ethos drives away this kind of soft communist type who pretends to care for humanity, but who secretly just wants the forced redistribution of private property by governments. And Bitcoin teaches commies and totalitarians like this person how to defund themselves and how to take themselves out of the economic game. They're not going to be buying Bitcoin anytime soon. And I, for one, am not going to miss them on a Bitcoin standard. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.